Drummond Island Dogman, chapters 1 and 2. This book was picked out by Scarlett and Cole as the next one that I should be reading from Johnathan Rand. I'm going to do a little sneak peek before we start chapters 1 and 2. So here's what the back says. Michigan chillers, 50% dog, 50% man equals 100% terror. October has come to beautiful Drummond Island, Michigan, and so has something else. For years, Michiganians have passed down tales of a horrifying half-man, half-dog creature known as Dogman. Stories around the campfire speak of a terrible beast that stalks the wilderness, a creature so hideous that the very name causes many to recoil in fear. Dogman. But are they only stories, or are they? On Drummond Island, Jackson Porter and Delaney Granger are about to unravel the mystery and uncover the horrifying truth about Dogman. And unfortunately for them, what they discover isn't a legend. It's a nightmare. Chapter 1. The sky was gray, and the clouds held rain. "Jackson, are you sure you know where you're going?" Delaney asked loudly. She was seated beside me in the side-by-side off-road vehicle and had to shout over the roaring engine. "I told you," I said. "I know this land like I know my bedroom. My dad owns over 100 acres. I grew up here, hiking and riding all over the place. There's no way I can get lost." "I hope not," Delaney said. "It looks like it's going to rain any second." "And that'll make it even more fun," I said. "The trails get all muddy, and we will, too." Delaney Granger and I had set out earlier in the afternoon in my side-by-side, which is sort of a souped-up four-wheel drive go-kart designed especially for off-road use. We'd been riding the trails on our property on Drummond Island, Michigan. Drummond Island, in my opinion, is the coolest place anyone could possibly live. I admit that I haven't traveled all over the country, but I've seen and read about some great places. To me, there's no place better than Drummond Island. It's a big island that's part of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. More than 2/3 of the island is owned by the state of Michigan, so it's public property. However, there are only about 1,200 people who live here. Maybe not even that many. The island is named after General Sir Gordon Drummond, Governor General and Administrator of Canada, who died way back in 1854. There's only one school on the island, and there are only about 50 students. I'm in 5th grade. Delaney's in the same grade, and she's a few months older than me. We met last summer when her family came to the island to help take care of her grandmother. Unfortunately, her grandma passed away over the summer, but Delaney's family loved Drummond Island so much that they decided to move to the island permanently earlier this spring. There are only 3 ways you can get to Drummond Island. There is a small airport, but there aren't any commercial airlines. You can arrive by boat if you have one, or you can come by car, which is what most people do. So if you ever want to come to the island with a vehicle, you'll have to take the ferry from Detour Village. Cars drive onto the flat barge-like vessel that safely transports them and their occupants across the St. Mary's River. The distance is about a mile, and the trip across the river takes only about 15 minutes. My dad and I have been back and forth across the river on the ferry a billion times. But what I like best about Drummond Island? Animals. There are all sorts of creatures that inhabit the wilds of Drummond Island. Deer, bear, raccoon, squirrels, chipmunks, coyotes, foxes, rabbits, and all sorts of birds. There are even a few moose on the island. The ponds and lakes have frogs, fish, and turtles of all types and sizes. There is another kind of animal, a predator, that inhabits the island, although you'll hardly ever see one. I'm talking, of course, about wolves. I've heard there are only a few on the island, but I've never seen them or their tracks. When I was little, I remember hearing them howling one night, and it freaked me out. So I don't worry too much about wolves while I'm hiking in the forest or riding the trails in the side-by-side. I don't worry about bears because they like to keep to themselves too. In fact, there aren't any animals on Drummond Island that I'm afraid of. But that was about to change. Chapter 2. I carefully needled the side-by-side along a thin trail down a hill, maneuvering around tight corners and over deep, jutting ruts. The knobby white tires handled most trails and hills with ease. I was taking Delaney to one of my favorite places, a small pond in a low-lying area deep within the island. "Here it is," I said, leaning a bit closer to Delaney so she could hear. As we approached the edge of the pond, I shut off the engine. It sputtered twice and then stopped. Pretty cool, Delaney said. This is where I found Hops, I said. He was right over there, pointing. 2 summers ago, I found an injured baby bunny in the weeds near the pond, and I brought him home. He had a bad cut on his leg, and Dad said it looked like he'd been attacked by a fox or a coyote. If that had been the case, it was amazing he'd escaped and was still alive. When I found him, his leg was all torn and bloody. I took him home, cleaned him up, and bandaged his leg. I kept him in a big box for a couple of months while he got better, and then I let him go into the woods. Or I tried to. The problem was by then he was too attached to me and wouldn't leave. I even tried taking him way back into the forest, but by the next day he'd found his way back. I discovered him in our front yard hopping around and chewing on grass. So he became my pet. I keep him in a big cage in our shed at night so he won't get eaten by predators. I let him out during the day and he pretty much just hops around the yard. So that's why I call him Hops. Are there any fish in the pond? Delaney asked, as she unbuckled her seatbelt, slipped off the seat, and stood. Her long blonde hair spilled over her shoulders. She was wearing a dark blue sweatshirt with a hoodie, as the October air was a little chilly, especially while riding in the off-road vehicle, or ORV. She strode to the edge of the pond. I, too, climbed out of the side-by-side. My name, Jackson Porter, was stenciled in white paint on the roll bar above the driver's side. Over the summer, the paint had started to chip, and I planned to repaint it soon. I walked to Delaney's side. No fish in here, I said, motioning toward the pond with my head. Tons of frogs in the summer, though. I looked up at the gray sky, at the trees shuddering in the cool fall breeze. It was autumn on Drummond Island, and many of the leaves had started to change color. Green leaves had given way to beautiful shades of yellow, copper, red, orange, and every hue in between. Many had already fallen from their branches, covering the ground like a carpet of colorful gemstones. The leaves that were still on the trees would soon turn brown and die, and be torn from the branches by fierce autumn storms. Lots of animal tracks here, Delaney said, squatting down on her haunches and pointing to the muddy ground near her feet. Look at these. I knelt down to see what she was looking at. There was a trail of very distinct tracks in the soft earth, creating perfect tiny claw prints. Raccoon, I said, very matter-of-factly. Growing up on Drummond Island, I was very familiar with all of the various tracks left by the different animals. You can tell just by the tracks? Delaney asked. I nodded. Every animal makes a different track, a different kind of print. See that over there? I pointed to yet another set of larger tracks, only a few feet away. Common tracks I instantly recognized. That's a deer, I said. This pond attracts all sorts of animals. I stood and took a few steps to the left, following the deer tracks as they led to the edge of the pond. Then they moved along the water's edge. I walked slowly, following them every so often, looking up to scan through the bushes that crouched tightly around the pond. The tracks were so fresh that I thought the deer might still be around. Delaney had moved in the opposite direction, walking the pond's edge. Wow, she called out. I wonder what made these tracks. They're huge. Are they from a bear? I turned and walked to her, stopping at her side. I looked at the tracks in the soft earth. I blinked and looked again. I rubbed my eyes and stared. Delaney sensed my uneasiness. What? She asked. What's wrong? Are there bear tracks? I ignored her. Not intentionally, of course, but I was too fascinated, too stunned by what I was seeing to respond. These aren't bear tracks, I thought. My heart was racing as I inspected the tracks. They must be wolf tracks. My heart hammered. Wolf tracks? Impossible. These tracks are bigger than my feet. Wolf tracks would be half this size. These tracks weren't made by A tingle of horror slithered beneath my skin, wrapping around my muscles and flowing through my bloodstream. A terrifying, nightmarish vision came to mind. No, it couldn't be. That's just a myth, a made-up story. Unless... Just thinking the word in my mind sent a wave of horror streaking through my arteries, filling my heart with dread. My heart pounded. One word, just 2 syllables. A 2-syllable word that made me dizzy with fear, icing my skin with terror chill. The word, Dogman.